So the thing I wish to point out to you is that in the alternatives that are here, Shaw Falls, the only two alternatives being considered now for this site, in comparison with the other possibilities, are a nuclear power station of either the 850 megawatt or the 600 megawatt size. Now, why are we going through this business of alternatives? And this is the second part of the new legislation. The Environmental Assessment Act is very, very emphatic that no longer will Ontario Hydro come up to the government or to whatever body we used to approach to, such as the Minister of Energy, and say, we want to build that station there now. We're not going to be able to do that in the future. We must go before the Environmental Assessment Board with alternatives. We can say, we need to build a station and we have to prove the need. And then we say, there are at least 4 ways of filling that need. One over there at Shaw Falls, one down there at Kingston, and maybe one over there in Lake Ontario outside Toronto. And the Environmental Hearing Board will decide. We will not decide. We will state that we believe among these alternatives that the most economic, the most attractive in terms of schedule, in terms of environmental impact, in terms of benefit to the communities adjacent to it, might be Shaw Falls 600 megawatts. We could say that. But we would not, that would not be our decision. It would be like these hearings before the National Energy Board for exports. It would be like any number of regulatory hearings that you are aware of today in this day and age. So our intent is at the end of next year to go before the Environmental Assessment Board of Ontario with the alternatives that we believe are feasible, and those alternatives will be few, some of 4, 8, 12. There's only 12 left. And before the end of next year, we believe that will be down to 4 or 5. And my belief is Shaw Falls will be one of those alternatives. Being an alternative means it will go before the Environmental Hearing Board, and it will be, if you like, traded off against the other locations in this province for where the next generating capability should be provided. I'll take the next slide, please, John. And there's a long question period at the end, and I'd be quite happy to deal with any questions that you have. Now, this is a map I'm sure the people in this area are very familiar with. It's the Morris Island area with the village here and the present Shaw Falls Dam here. Is this clear? Is the print too small at the back? Can you see what we're talking about here? That's the present dam. And here's the road leading into the present dam. Oh, thanks, John. Here's the village. Here's Mr. Johnson's holdings over here on the other end of the island. And here's the railway running through here. Now, this dam, as you know, was built in 1931. And at that time, Ontario Hydro acquired nearly all of the property shown on this map. Today, it owns a property line approximately identified by this black outline. Some 960 acres of land. Presently owned by the corporation and has since 1931. The property is mostly marsh, as you know. Recently they blew out the beaver dams, I see, and reduced the water levels. We are proposing that the nuclear power station that would go in about here. It would take cooling water either from backwards through the Mississippi Snai, and I'll talk about that more in a moment, and discharge it along the head wall to the dam, where it would be mixed with the balance of the river flow coming down right at the powerhouse here as it goes through the powerhouse turbines, and it's thoroughly mixed. Because the water will come out of here 10 degrees C warmer than when it went in. But when you mix it with the rest of the river, right here, it comes out down below, not very much warmer than when it came in. Now, I think those are the only features I wanted to identify here. I have another slide, please, John. The other feature before you do, yeah, this will do. This is the same map, but it's intended to show one other thing that many of you, I'm sure, are aware of, is this area is laced with transmission lines now. Because one of the big jobs when you build a power station is how do you get the power out to get it to the people. Now, the second largest growth of electricity in the province of Ontario is Ottawa and the National Capital Region. And there are no power stations in the immediate vicinity of Ottawa, as you know. Now that's the first problem. It's a very large electrical growth area. The second problem is that we, as I said, must deliver that power, and it must not only go to Ottawa, but it must be connected into the rest of our hydro system. And the lines are there. There are 4 lines on the old Gatineau line running to Toronto. And there are 2 lines right now run off to Ottawa. Now these lines as they stand right now are not sufficiently large to carry the power from a new generating station. They would have to be upgraded. But basically, there is a lot of transmission in the area now, and the total overall impact of new transmission, I believe, would be very much less. Now the third feature I wanted to talk about was the navigation facilities. Have we got a slide that shows that, John? Or can we go back to the previous one? Oh, can we have the previous one, please? One of the things that, when we were looking at this location for a generating station that came out, was that the act of building the power station here results in significant channel improvements, particularly to the Mississippi Snai, up to where you see this Lock A marked. So we retained the Shawinigan Engineering Company in Montreal to do a study on the feasibility of making the Ottawa River navigable completely around the Shaw Dam. That is, you'd be able to take your boat from Chenot now right on down to Chaudière. What's the next thing down here that blocks you from going? Pardon me? Lac de Chêne. Thank you. Now, Shawinigan looked at this, and they did a study, and they showed that it was feasible coming through Fitzroy now. If you remember in the old days, they started to dig a canal, I understand, way up here in the 1880s, was it? And but the trouble here was, of course, it's so narrow at the railway bridge still that it's not any good for navigation. There would have been a large expenditure there.
The people who signed in, the sign-in forms, by the way, if you haven't signed in, the Municipal Coordinating Committee would be very pleased if you would for us, so we can contact you again when other meetings may happen. But of the people that signed in, we have approximately 100 people here that have come from Fitzroy Harbour. We have, again, numbers over the 20 from McLaren's Landing and the Woodlawn area. We have people from Carp, Crown Point, Biden Acres, Constance Bay, Arnprior, Kinburn, Galeta, Dunrobin, Martins Bay. What? Galeta.
We don't care here what you call us as long as you pronounce it right.
Okay. And Calabogie. Now, in areas where Don won't know so well, so my pronunciation will get by, we do have also some friends here from Shawville, Pakenham, Almont, Canada, Ingersoll, Ottawa, a large number from Ottawa, Embrun, Hawkesbury, Limoges. Hey Don, is that okay?
Très bien.
Okay. Oshawa, Waterloo, Burlington, someone from Deep River, Trenton, and Toronto. So in all of the people that signed in, we counted up that we have at least 270 people here. So we thank you for coming. Now, the purpose of the Shaw Falls Municipal Coordinating Committee, or perhaps I could say our goal, is to ensure that the public is involved in Ontario Hydro's planning process for the development of their land holdings at Shaw Falls, so that the existing conditions, the goals and aspirations of both the local municipalities and the regional community can be incorporated in the decision-making process. So this is the goal of all of us people that meet till 1 in the morning. The purpose of the committee is we are asking to be recognized as the liaison between Ontario Hydro and the local municipalities for both information and communication purposes. This will include the monitoring, the evaluation, and the dissemination of information and the coordination of public activities. You have been introduced to the members of the committee. The makeup at this present time is the committee represents the Township of West Carleton, with both elected representatives and citizens on that committee, the Town of Briar, the Township of March, and the Regional Municipality of Ottawa-Carleton. Again, with these municipalities, a mix of citizens, elected representatives, and at times staff. Other areas, other municipalities that are considering becoming members of this committee right now are the Township of McNabb and the County of Renfrew. The terms of reference that we have developed for our committee, and by the way, over at the table where you signed in, we have a very brief resume of them, have been designed to be flexible enough to accommodate other local communities and municipalities as they are concerned, and also to accommodate the large number of interest groups and individuals that may want to get involved in some aspect of the study, ongoing throughout the studies, or in any other form. Now, to achieve the goals and the purpose that I just discussed, this committee sees themselves starting with a number of information activities, working along with Ontario Hydro, this being the first of them. Our objective for this meeting, other than to provide information to you people about what Ontario Hydro is doing, and I must say that they did a wonderful job of that tonight, we also want to begin at this meeting to start to define what our issues or what our interests are, and on defining those issues, how you would like to get more information or to give input about your concerns. There are a number of ways we could do it. We could be giving you status reports. There could be news reports. There could be direct mailings. We could have public meetings. We could meet. When I say me, I hope I include Ontario Hydro here too, Don. Mm-hmm. We could meet with groups on request. We could hold public meetings in other areas. So this gives you an idea of what we want to get out tonight. So we will be recording your questions as you ask them. A lot of the questions I know will be to get immediate information or to clarify interpretations of what you heard tonight. Other questions will be about issues. We're going to record these, and then after the question period, I'm going to come back to you, and we're going to try to determine what the key issues are at this point in time, and if you could be thinking too how we could get involved with you in more information and communication activities to debate, discuss, or involve Ontario Hydro and other perhaps important agencies or people in a debate about these issues. Thanks.
Thank you, Alison. We are now open for questions from the audience. The microphone is in the center of the room. Would you give your name, and if you want to direct the question to someone on the panel, feel free to do so.
Ian Connerty, Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility. I'd like to congratulate the regional municipality for being the first in Ontario to even have the chance to have any input prior to such a decision being made by Hydro. And it's interesting that Hydro did not call this meeting, the municipality did. The issues are so broad that I have to wonder how much time you're willing to spend discussing the issues. We're making representations to the Porter Commission in Toronto, and just on the question of reactor safety, we spent 2 days cross-examining AECL. But more important than the technical issues is a question of need, and I have with me the final report of the Select Committee of the Legislature, which examined Hydro last year, made up of all parties, unanimously agreed to, number of recommendations, which so far have been ignored by Hydro. One of them relates to the need for the energy. According to one of the recommendations in this report, hydro has over-forecast the need for electricity by a factor of 35%. And over the next 10 years, that translates into $9.8 billion worth of nuclear plants. Now, if our elected representatives in Toronto are correct, and hydro has over-forecast the need by such a tremendous amount, do we really need this nuclear reactor?
Okay, I will take that as your question, because do we need this reactor? Don, would I refer that to you? I'd just like to make just one observation. The committee here is primarily region and the local municipalities, and we have set this up or organized this for partly a selfish reason, and we don't want bouquets for it. We just want progress. Don, would you answer the question, please?
Thank you, Don. Well, Mr. Connerty, as he indicated, is certainly well known at the Royal Commission and in other forums, but I have to take strong exception to his reference to the Select Committee report. It was produced by a committee of all three parties, it's correct. Produced a number of recommendations, I believe 33 in total, which Ontario Hydro has implemented or has underway 31 of those 33 recommendations. Now, the Government of Ontario does not accept the fact that Ontario Hydro is overestimating the need for electricity. And we do not accept it, and I do not believe that the people of Ontario in general, I accept perhaps the jury is out, but I suggest to you that there's recent evidence to show that the electricity is needed, and we will need to build more power stations. What's in it for Ontario Hydro to keep building power stations? We're a people's power company. Our job is to build stations as the need is there, and nothing else. Now, the growth rate that we're building to now in Ontario is a 6% load growth rate. Ontario Hydro has been in existence for 71 years. And in that 71 years, we have that 71 years of history and experience and knowledge of the electrical business to try and forecast what will happen. We believe the electrical load in Ontario will continue to grow. We were told last year by this select committee that the load would not grow. In fact, when the year came down at the end of 1976, and if you're interested, I have a copy of our annual report, you will see that the demand for electricity in 76 increased by 9.5%, not 6, and that the demand for energy increased by nearly 8%, not 5.5%. Now, the facts are one thing, and people's opinion about what will happen are another. It'd be a nice, easy cop-out for Ontario Hydro to say, look, why not? Why should we bother? You know, we'll just forget about it, and when the lights do go out, then we can start to build stations then and make sure the power is there, and let really prove the case. But that's not a responsible position for a public utility. And we do the best job we can based on the knowledge and experience we have from our 73 years history to forecast the growth and needs of this province and to build to suit. Now, I'll make one other point. He quoted a number of 35% overbuilding. Now, that is an example of the trouble you can get into if you oversimplify numbers. As you know, you cannot build you don't build electrical power stations just to meet the load. You have to provide something called reserve. That is, if the people in the province are using, let's say, 15,000 megawatts, we have to have about 18 or 19,000 megawatts of capacity built and in place for a perfectly valid reason that some of this equipment has to be down for maintenance. Some of this equipment has experiences failures and breakdowns, and we came very close in December of last year. As many of you may have read, there were blackouts in Windsor and other places because of this. Some of our equipment stopped just at the point where the load was the highest. So mixed in with that 35% overbuild that has been quoted is the reserve that Ontario Hydro provides to ensure that you have a reliable supply of electricity, not one that goes on and off every time something goes wrong with a piece of equipment.
Lady at the microphone.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask 3 very short questions and hope for 3 concise answers if possible. I'm an environmental physiologist. My name is Dr. Weinberger. So, of course, I'm interested in the environmental impact studies. The 3 questions. 1, who conducts the biotic environmental studies in for hydro so that they should be objective? May I have the answers?
Oh, you would like me to answer each one, or do you want to give all 3?
No, please.
Mrs. Weinberg. Pardon me?
Who conducts the environmental biotic experiments so that they should be objective on behalf of hydro?
And that's it's a 2-stage process. The first thing you need is environmental baseline studies. That is an inventory of what's there.
Who conducts them?
We retain consulting engineering companies to do generally our environmental baseline studies. They're the people that you'll see flying weather balloons or out with nets tying out what the fish population is and so on. And generally there's a spectrum of about 8 or 10 private companies in Ontario who will undertake the environmental baseline studies. And we can give you a register of who they are if you like.
Are these studies published and available for scrutiny by others than hydro?
Every time, ma'am. You can name any generating station that we have built, and you can get the environmental assessment document and the baseline data sent to you, or it's in the libraries, or we distributed for this gentleman keeps getting in the way. For the Darlington generating station, we distributed 350 copies of the environmental analysis of what was there to start with and what will the impact of constructing Darlington be, or Pickering, or Bruce.
So the third question is, because you already have the baseline data from other stations, have you been able to build a model, a mathematical model, and put in our own hydrological data from this particular area in order to credibly assess the environmental impact if a station were to be built at Shuts Falls?
Yeah, I will give you part of an answer, and if you wish more detailed one, I have our head of the environmental biology section here as well, if you'd like that. But the answer to your question in general terms, if I may, we have 2 kinds of models. We have mathematical models, and we build models. If you go to our hydraulic laboratory on Kipling Avenue in Toronto, you will find a full-scale model of each of the projects that we have undertaken on the Great Lakes, and we would have to do the same thing here before we could even get environmental approval for the station. It is now a mandatory requirement of the Government of Ontario through the Environmental Protection Act, which is the governing legislation. That's the Act of 1971, which requires these pollution counts and is a very powerful piece of legislation. That is a requirement of that act that we now do full hydraulic modeling on if you like, a modeling type approach, as well as a mathematical analysis of the impact.
And the last question, does this study include data on algae and diatoms in the area, or does
algae and diatoms?
Algae and diatoms, are these included in the study?
Yeah, I'll refer to Dr. Effer, if I may, who's our environmental biologist in the area, and perhaps you would answer the question, Ray.
Could you come up and you can have my chair here.
If I may very briefly go back to Don's answer, if I might be permitted to alter his answer just a little bit. We do have a very large biology section in Ontario Hydro, and I would say at the current time the majority of the aquatic biology studies are done in-house. I think your question, frankly, was just a wee bit loaded, because you said, how is it done so it will remain objective? I feel quite confident that our studies are very objective, and they're supervised by the regulatory agencies. The document that we produce is also supervised and criticized extensively in the public and at the regulatory agency level. So I don't have any qualms about the technical content if it is produced in-house. Going back to your last question, we do carry out
algal studies at each of our stations. This is a particular problem in the Great Lakes, and we have got extensive number of papers published, which I can refer you to.
Yes, please.
In diatoms, we do have also masses of information at each of our stations. We at the moment don't have them for shorefalls, but we're getting them this year.
Thank you.
Ray, could you arrange to give her would you give Ray your address, and perhaps he could mail you a bibliography of the relevant technical data?
Thank you very much. Very good questions. Yes, sir?
Just a short question. Our desirable growth rate for electrical generating capacity in the future, has it considered our declining petroleum reserves?
What's your name, please?
I'm Dr. Zabo. I'm a nuclear engineer with DND.
D&D. Well, that's a very big question. Ontario Hydro is in the energy business, just as the people who supply natural gas and the people who supply oil and the people who supply any form of energy that are used by the citizens of this province. We have, I think I indicated on the chart, on the board, the one, the green and the white, or the green and the red, the gold and the gold, showed, oh, I'm sorry. I indicated that as far as Ontario Hydro is concerned, the burning of natural gas and oil is out for the production of electricity in the future, with this very minor exception that if an emergency arose where we had to install gas turbines, which are a very uneconomic form of generating electricity, but can be installed very quickly in an emergency to meet a sudden change in demand. With the exception of gas turbines, we do not intend to build generating stations that consume natural gas or oil in the future. Now, the other half of your question, if I understood it, what about what's known in the jargon, inter-energy transfers? Is that where your question was leading? That is, in the future, if the railways are electrified, if people are starting to drive electric cars 10 to 15 years from now, if any number of electrical uses become more predominant in the future than they are today, have we taken that into account into our load growth? And the answer is no. We haven't been able to, because it's speculative. It's not in the present load growth prognostication for the next 12 years. Because that growth is 6%, period. It's been a rule that's laid down on Ontario Hydro that we are going to expand at 6% load growth rate in this province and no more. That came from the Government of Ontario when they cut back Ontario Hydro's borrowings last year, or a year ago February, by $1.5 billion. They said simply, that's it. You're going to grow at 6% in the rate you supply electricity, and any difference between what we actually think the load growth will be and what we're going to be allowed to build will have to be taken up by conservation. And I can't impress on anyone in this room more emphatically the fact that energy conservation is real, it's important, and it's something that everybody has got to pay attention to in the future, because if you don't, if everyone uses electricity exactly the way they have the last 73 years in terms of increasing per capita use, we're not going to have enough facilities in 1987 to meet that demand. We could see that right now. And Ontario Hydro and our chairman has made many speeches to this effect around the province, saying he's not kidding. He's really serious when he says that if we don't conserve electricity, we don't use it wisely and stop wasting it, then we have a very serious problem in this province.
Next.
My name is Peter Fournier, and I'm from the University of Ottawa. I'm in fourth year biology, and if you want my address, it's 52 Glen Avenue, Ottawa. I hate to get into a particularly thorny issue here, but I feel I have to. I've come to this meeting and I realize that it is a local information meeting, and looking at the people that have come up, I realize that they're all from out of the community. So I'd like to bring up a point that concerns not only me in Ottawa, but also the people of this community very seriously. And that is the question of nuclear waste. I realize that your power plant will probably be built, no matter what we do, because Ontario needs
because Ontario needs the electricity. I also realize that you will probably build these power plants even if you are very concerned about the nuclear waste problem, because you don't see any way out of this need for electricity. So I'm not blaming you, I'm not doing anything, but I am very concerned about this question of nuclear waste. I'd like to know what's going to happen to that nuclear waste for now and the next 10,000 years.
Well, why did you stop at 10,000? Why did you make it 100,000 or a million? You know, that's a long period of time. But well, Mr. Pointy, the first point is that I made the point before, and I'll make it again. It's not definite that a nuclear power station at this time will be built at Shaw Falls.
Will there be any power plants built in Ontario?
There will be more power plants built in Ontario.
Then it still concerns this community here.
It concerns this community as equally as it concerns the citizens of Bath, Newcastle, and Port Hope. And
no, it concerns
that's
everyone.
fair ball.
Ottawa, Toronto, Windsor, everything.
That's right, and those are the places that use electricity as well.
It's more than that. It's a worldwide problem. This power plant, if it is built here, is a worldwide problem.
Well, I don't see it that way. I will deal with the question of nuclear waste, however. You think we have a very serious problem, and we think we have a task. That's putting it as simply as I can. It's been blown up, you know, that I can only say that the fearmongers have done a pretty successful job on waste fuel, and the fact of the matter is, because they've been so successful, is because we probably haven't done a very good job explaining it.
President
The
Carter
answer is very simple.
Can I interrupt you for a second? President Carter
answer.
of the United States has just canceled his nuclear breeder power program precisely because of the question of nuclear waste.
Peter,
That's not true at all, and you know that as well as I do.
Peter,
What would
let
he
Don
ever
answer
do
the
with
question as
60,000
you've related it
pounds
first, please.
All right, well, let's get back to the question that was asked. What will happen to the spent fuel that comes from a nuclear power station? The fuel, and I wish I had a fuel bundle here. I don't know whether you've seen a nuclear fuel bundle. It's 50 centimeters long, and it's about a diameter that large, and it's equivalent to 5,000 tons of coal. And we produce, in 1 year, we put into and take out of that reactor anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 of these bundles. When they come out of the reactor, they're extremely radioactive, and they are handled by fueling machines and stored in deep bays at the station. And you can go to Pickering today, and you can look down under the water and stand there, and you can see the fuel that's come out of Pickering over the past 5 years.
Anybody can do that, can't they?
Who can?
Terrorists, if they want to. But no security for any
What?
power plant in Ontario.
Not true.
That is true. That is why the Porter Commission is not allowing.
I would like to
gentleman at the
concur
mic now.
in this effort to bring this meeting to order. I don't think we should get emotional in this problem. I think it needs a reasonable, reasoned, logical answer.
All right, where was I? Yes. The fuel will be stored in those water bays as it is at Pickering and Bruce now, and as at Douglas Point, and as NBD, which has been running for 12 years up the river here. And at that point in time, it will have cooled down heat-wise to a point where it will be shipped to a central repository. And at that point in time, the people of Ontario will have a decision to make. Because there's one thing that's unique about this Candu reactor, ladies and gentlemen, and you won't hear it from these kind of people, is the Candu reactor doesn't need plutonium and never did and never will. Plutonium is the problem that President Carter's got, and plutonium is the problem that many people have got to come to grips with. Now, I'm simply telling you today that we don't need plutonium in Ontario because we're fortunate to have the Candu reactor. And we won't... I will finish my comment and deal with that, but it's going to go on all night if we keep at it. Now, the point about the decision that would have to be made, not by next year or 5 years or 15 years from now, is simply this. When the fuel comes out of the reactor, it contains plutonium. Now, if in 1995, when we have a very different situation in this world with respect to oil, gas, and many other non-renewable resources, if the people still believe that plutonium is a bad scene, that the very complicated process of extracting the plutonium from that fuel, because it requires to dissolve the fuel bundle in acid, select out this plutonium, reconcentrate the plutonium, put it in new fuel bundles, put it back in the reactor. That's called the plutonium cycle. We don't have anything to do with that now. But if, in 1995, the people in a different world scene altogether still say, we don't want plutonium, then the stuff goes straight into the ground where it came from. And we turn it first into glass, and we bury it deep in the ground, about 4,000 to 5,000 feet deep, and that's where it'll stay forever. And it's no more hazardous, in my view, than the mercury that we're throwing all over the continent now in rivers and waters and everywhere else.
Peter, do you have another question?
No, it's a comment on his answer. I'd like to point out that everyone, I think, in North America regrets the spreading of mercury all over the continent. I'd also, I think everyone here would perhaps like you to attach some numbers to what you've just said. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, next question.
What are the numbers? Like amounts, projected amounts of plutonium, radioactive wastes? How long will it take to degrade?
I don't have them with me, but you have innumerable reports from us at the Royal Commission, which you can refer to, and I'm sorry I don't have them with me. If I did,
This panel here doesn't have the expertise to give me that answer.
We did not bring any data on plutonium production with us, no. I'm sorry, I can give it to you, or I'll give you a reference if you like.
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments to make. I'm from the close to the town of Fars, Ontario, which is the western end of Ottawa, Carleton, and I built a house in 1973, and at that time, Ontario Power Corporation Hydro had sent me ads and saying, build yourself a gold medallion home. Put electricity outside in your flower beds, along your laneway, do everything electrically. In 1973, 2 years later, Ontario Hydro was begging me to conserve energy. If that's the type of planning and that you people are responsible for, then
You want to respond?
No.
No response. Have you another question?
Yeah, I just had a comment or a question to ask of the process of the various process that took place here about 2 years ago, where Ontario Hydro took over land just upstream on the river from Arnprior, and they flooded prize farmland, and I've talked to a few people who have commented on the process that took place how the people were consulted, or rather were not consulted in the process to take over and flood this prime farmland. That's all for now. Thank you.
Mal, do you want to make a comment on the last statement? I think you're...
Well, go ahead, Mal, if you want. I can answer. I'll make a statement you like.
I'm going to just direct an odd question around here because of a couple of reasons, and I just want to make this observation. I would like to hear questions from the residents of the harbour and West Carleton as well. Go ahead, Mal.
My name is Gord Harrison, and I'm from March.
Just hold for a second. Mal is going to answer that last response.
Yeah, I don't think it requires a lengthy answer. Certainly the people who live in the local area are very familiar with the problems that we had at Iron Prior. Certainly there was a long period of time when there was a lot of indecision. It was a very uncomfortable situation for the farmers who owned the land in that head pond area. We are well aware of that. There just simply wasn't too much we could do about it. The geology of that area, as you know, was one of insecure or high instability. There was far more testing than anyone ever had anticipated, and it took months and months and months of investigation before we ever knew where the high water line would be, or the area that would have to be acquired to prevent the slipping of the head pond slipping of land into the head pond area. So we just could not determine the boundary of that head pond for a long, long time. And yes, it did cause a great deal of concern for the farm community.
Okay, Mr. Harrison?
Like I was saying, I'm from March Township, and I would like to know, do the people of this area have the power of veto? In other words, if we decide we don't want this nuclear plant in our area, what will be Hydro's response?
Well, that's a very fair question, Mr. Harrison. The Environmental Assessment Act is new, as I said. It's been never before been applied to a hydro generating station undertaking. And we're determined to make it work, and it requires public participation. Now, I can only speculate as to how it could go, but if I may speculate, would say it would probably go like this. If Ontario Hydro puts up 4 alternatives to meet the need for the next generating station, and the Environmental Hearing Board sat to hear that, I would suggest they'd be wise to hold at least some of their hearings in each of the areas where the 4 alternative proposals would be suggested to go. And that would mean I would expect the Environmental Hearing Board could be expected to appear at Fitzroy, maybe perhaps in this room, and hear deputations from the people regarding the specific problems and questions that the people have in this area. Similarly, they'll be down at Tibet and do the same down there. Then I would guess that if you look at the process, and as it's described in the Act, it's extremely complicated, and I say we're feeling our way along. I would guess they would then hold summation hearings in Toronto, in which all representations would be dealt with. So I suggest, and I believe very strongly, that the citizens of each of the areas that we're talking about are going to have a very strong influence on which way it goes. Now, on these questions, it's always difficult to discern what most of the people are thinking most of the time. Elections sometimes do that. But otherwise, it's going to take quite a lot of effort on everybody in this room to deal with the question, think about it, look at what's coming out, what material comes from Hydro, what comes through your committee from Hydro, and what alternative views are expressed, and you're hearing some of them tonight, which are legitimately held, and to come down one way or the other. And I think that process will eventually manifest itself in some way that the people of this area may submit a brief or hire their own lawyer to appear in Toronto, or any number of ways that they can, for the first time, make their majority view known and felt before a tribunal which is hearing alternatives, true alternatives. There's really a choice. It's not just a hard decision made by some large corporation at a certain period of time. I've attempted to answer it. Does it come close?
Well, in summation, when you say that if the people of this area say no, then the plant won't be built?
Here. If the people here come down very hard and have good, valid reasons for doing so, then I would suggest that's what the Act's all about.
Thank you.
Ken Draper, Fitzroy Harbour. More and more these days I'm thinking of a story from the Bible about a son who sold his birthright to his other brother for, I believe, a bowl of porridge. The latest incident that made me think of this was the James Bay business, where we were told through the Fifth Estate that Quebec Hydro is selling power to the Americans, New York City, for instance, at a pittance as opposed to what they're getting from the residents. And this disturbs me terribly because as far as I'm concerned, in the small part I sit, we see this more and more happening in Canada. Okay, my question, just how is this power, how much of it is going to be, if you will, for our use, and I say our Canadian use, and if it is going to be sold, two parts, I'm sorry, are we going to get just rewards for it if it goes to the Americans?
Fair question. Last year, Ontario Hydro bought more power in than it sold outside the province of Ontario. Ontario Hydro's job is to build generating stations to meet the needs of the people in Ontario. We do not build generating stations to export power and never have since 1930-something when we got into a messy business under Ferguson, I think was the premier. The point here is simply that the need I'm talking about is the need of the people of Ontario, the industries of Ontario, the businesses and the concerns of this province. That's the need, and that's what the station's being built for, and no other reason. But I will qualify my remark by saying this. During the winter time, you people use a lot more electricity than you do in the summer. That's slowly changing as you install more and more air conditioners. Now, every day, our load dispatcher in Toronto, if he, in the summertime or in the fall, he gets a question from New York that says, is it possible to buy any power on a spot basis? We don't enter into contracts, but on a spot basis, spot purchase basis, he says, well, look, all our generating stations are not operating right now because, you know, they're built to meet the peak demand, which might be the period from November through to March. And in that period of time, he might agree to export, and he does agree to export electricity to the United States on a spot basis. Now that's a very different thing from what Quebec Hydro has just entered into, which is a long-term contract to deliver power come hell or high water. And we do not do that, have not done it, and certainly any plant we would build here would be only for the purposes of the people of Ontario.
Thank you.
My name is Barbara Aylesworth. You're saying that this power is for Ontario, but as far as I understand it, and this question comes from Non-Nuclear Future for Ontario, recent studies in the US and the UK have shown that the real growth in electricity demand has been zero or negative for the last 3 years in those countries. Apparently, growth has been caused by energy that's invested in new electrical generating capacity. In other words, a great deal of the growth of energy is because nuclear reactors require so much energy to be built, so that the energy is going towards energy producing. The AECL annual report of 1973-1974 offers an example of energy to produce energy. The Candu BLW at Gentilly, Quebec was not operated during the year. Its inventory of heavy water has been transferred at the end of 1972 to Douglas Point so that the latter could be brought into operation to provide steam for the Bruce heavy water plant, to provide heavy water for Pickering, to provide the juice for Toronto. Could you comment on that, please?
Certainly. You know, it's amazing what you can get out of a question, isn't it? Now, I'll start off, and I want to try and get right to the root of the question. You're talking about energy balance. That is, you made the statement that it uses up, to build a nuclear power station, consumes a whole big bunch of energy, a lot more than the thing produces. Right. Now, that is totally false. And we have produced documentation in the public forum, at the select committee, at RCEP, and there's lots of documents floating around this province to prove that. And that statement that you read there...
There's lots of documents floating around that disprove what you're saying.
Opinions, there's lots of opinions in this world. The thing you have to look for is fact.
I am.
And I'm telling you that Pickering, in the 9 months after Pickering started
that report comes from the Atomic Energy Commission of Canada.
Well, just a minute. I'm taking the first part of your question.
That's from your own...
You started off quoting UK and US studies.
Yeah, and then I read from the AECL
I'm answering the first part
annual
first.
report.
Fine. I'll deal with that in a moment.
Okay.
The first part of your question implied that there's a net negative energy balance associated with power station construction, and that is not right. It is woefully wrong. You get over 50 times as much energy out. There's some ACL people here. I also will admit that the Gentil 1 nuclear power station was an experimental prototype reactor, which is not at all like the station we're talking about here, and it has not run very much. And as a result, they have transferred their heavy water at certain periods of time to stations that do run, one of them being Douglas Point. Now, I'm actually very proud of the one aspect of that statement you made. At Bruce, today, the heavy water we produce is manufactured from steam coming straight from our nuclear reactors. Now, in the future, that's the use of processed steam, which is something everybody should be thinking about because we think it's an energy form that's right here with us today. We are suggesting that nuclear power stations in the future will not only deliver electricity out through wires to the people, but those stations will have pipes hooked to them, which will deliver warm water to communities in the area, will deliver steam through pipes to local industry, and the best and first demonstration of that is the Bruce heavy water plant using the steam from the Bruce reactors.
I don't think you've answered my question in terms of energy input.
I'm saying categorically that the statement you quoted from the US and the UK reports is wrong. There is a net positive energy balance by a factor of over 50.
How much energy produced in Canada is nuclear energy provided? I've heard the figure of 1%. Is that true? 1% of the total energy?
Total energy. I'm not sure I can answer that. I can tell you that last year, nuclear energy supplied 18% of Ontario's electricity.
Well,
okay, and 31% of it was provided by hydraulic generating stations around the province, and the balance came from burning coal or from purchases.
Well, I've heard the figure of the total nuclear energy produced in Canada being 1% of the total energy, and that the burning of wood also produced 1% of the energy in Canada. What tiny fraction of the cost of atomic energy?
I can't tell you what fraction that the nuclear energy we generated in Ontario last year was of the total Canadian energy picture. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer.
I have one more question about waste. The gentleman from Ottawa University was talking about, and can you tell me what would happen during the next 10,000 years? Whereas actually, it's my understanding that the plutonium existing in the waste you are producing right now takes 250,000 years to become relatively harmless.
Mm-hmm.
Calculating a generation at 20 years, this represents 12,500 generations. We've forgotten the secret of how to build the pyramids, how they were actually constructed, which is something that we knew 250 generations ago. Now, when you say, you said something or other, and you explained about the expensive glass garbage bag that you're going to put it in, and you said that's where it will stay forever.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how can you possibly talk for the next 12,500 generations and say that nothing unforeseen will occur and that you have the right to talk for those people? And otherwise, Ontario Hydro has a monopoly over the atmosphere of the earth. Are you sure there's not going to be an earthquake? Are you sure there's not going to be a volcano? Are you sure there's not going to be floods that will, wreck the offices where you have the records of where these things are buried, or that languages will change, like many civilizations appear and disappear in 250,000 years? And that doesn't include human pathways, such as dictators coming into power, a nuclear weapon landing in that area and causing the whole thing to blow up. Do you have clairvoyance at Ontario Hydro that can say what will happen during the next 12,500 generations?
No.
How can you possibly justify creating that garbage?
I have no comment.
So you can't justify it. In other words, you have not come to any conscienceable reason to justify creating that kind of garbage.
No, I don't have clairvoyance, ma'am. I'm sorry. I appreciate it.
Why is that just a stupid question? Why no comment?
Next question.
No answer that you can give and still build the power plant.
Jim Boss from Fitzroy Harbour.
I'd like to ask a question I think would be a very great concern for the people within this area. I heard mentions before about traffic transportation, housing, filtration for water, sewage, so forth and so on. If this plant is built here, and I say yeah, hopefully, where is the monies for these developments coming from? Is the tax base going to be from this direct area? Does Ontario Hydro contribute to the taxation burden that would be imposed upon this area? Or are we just left holding the bag?
Well, I'll answer that as best I can. The Ontario Hydro does not pay taxes per se. It's not allowed to because of the Power Corporation Act. But however, Ontario Hydro does pay grants in lieu of taxes. And on a power station like the one we're proposing to might go into Fitzroy, it would be of the same type as Pickering, as I mentioned, the display. And when it's finished, if it was built, when it was finished in 1988, my guess would be the annual taxes that we pay to the community would be of the order of $700,000 per year. Now that's straight taxes paid by an industrial undertaking into the municipality. The second thing that Ontario Hydro does, and it was touched on briefly by John Dobson here, is we recognize a strange peculiarity associated with building these large lead time undertakings. Like they don't pay taxes till they're finished, but they're building for 6 or 7 years, and during that time, that's when all the people are coming in and maybe going away again, a lot of them. So Ontario Hydro has a system of special grants and grants in lieu of taxes, where as we did primarily in the Bruce area for Kincardine and Port Elgin, and also have signed an agreement with the town of Newcastle to do in that area when Darlington starts construction, pay toward sewage expansion, pay towards schools, pay toward all of the infrastructure which would be affected by our construction workers coming into the area. Nobody is left holding the bag when Ontario Hydro, financially in a community, when Ontario Hydro comes into the area. And I believe our record stands on that, and I suggest you go to any of the other areas where we have built power stations to find that out yourself. But that's a statement that our chairman has made many times, that every community will be saved harmless.
There's a second part to my question as well. I'm very familiar with the Bath construction station that you have there. During the construction of this, people were imported from Toronto. Busloads of people would come from Toronto. The base of the wage scale of that area, I would imagine, increased, I think it was about 100%. Now, after the construction was finished, people were left in the area with that wage scale situation. And businesses had been developed, etc. Now, how is this going to affect us in this area?
That's a very fair question. Every community has that concern. What does it do to the wage levels, due to the high pay paid to the construction workers while they're there? Now, Bath is a fair example to make, but we're talking about a nuclear power station in Fitzroy, and I didn't say in my speech, but at the start, but I perhaps should indicate now, that the peak construction force to build the plant that we're suggesting out here would be 3,300 men. But when the job is finished, it will take 550 permanent jobs to run the plant, all of which would be permanent jobs in this area from, we hope, people who are living in this area working there, rather than commuting type jobs. Now, perhaps, John, can you answer, have we got an example of a situation where we were in, well, perhaps Arnprior. What's the situation at Arnprior, where the wage levels in Arnprior ratcheted way up while we were building the dam there, and then not come down or cause distresses in the community after we went out? Maybe the people in Arnprior know better than the people we have here. Do you know, Mel? Maybe the Arnprior people can.
Yeah, well, I think you're talking about a bigger construction.
Oh, very much bigger, right?
In Arnprior, so that is going to be a basic factor right there.
If I might just mention that the type of jobs that we'll be looking at during this construction period, there was similar concerns at the Lennox station in terms of loss of labor related to agriculture, that type of concern. The jobs on the construction force on-site are union jobs, and the number of skilled trades and the variety are quite extensive. The only fact that enters back into this is that Ontario Hydro pays the union rate, the going rate for that particular skill, whatever it might be. And whether it be Ontario Hydro or another construction project in an area employing that trade, they would have to pay a similar rate. So unless we're talking about taking individuals from the local population and either changing their skill levels or upgrading their trades and putting them into a union category, which they weren't previously in, this effect should be minimal. Only in the areas, the labor areas where there might be some transference from local labor forces.
Thank you.
My name is Ian Hornby. I'm with Pollution Probe in Ottawa.
What's the name again?
Ian Hornby in Pollution Probe in Ottawa.
Hornby.
I'm wondering if someone here could tell me what is the population of Fitzroy Harbour? 300. Thank you. Now, from what you've just said, I understand that more than 2,000 workers will be employed on site.
During construction?
During construction.
There'll be about 3,000, over 3,000, yeah.
Now, will these men be housed on the site?
It depends on the particular situation. For this particular area, I would suspect we would build a camp for single construction workers. The married construction workers will, depending on what the community does, some communities choose to stay small, then there will not be a lot of development in that area. And in other areas where housing stock is built, and there's good examples of this elsewhere for the Bruce project, Paisley and Southampton did not grow very much, but Kincardine and Port Elgin did, and that was their choice to a large extent.
Approximately what percentage will be single
of the
construction workers?
Well, we've got. Are you worried about your daughters in this area? But the sort of demographic statistics that we built up from a lot of projects in the past indicates, I believe, that around 75 to 80% are married, and they have sort of 1.9 kids per married couple or something like that.
I'm sorry, you said 35% are married? You said 35% are married?
No, about 75 to 80% are married.
I see. So we can assume then that there'll be 700 unmarried men living on site in Fitzroy Harbour.
To make that, I don't know they'll all be living on the site, but
Order, please.
The question's leading somewhere, I can see it.
Perhaps I'm not too sure the direction that you're heading. But anyway.
I think my next question may...
I'll respond to what you've said so far. The committee, in their deliberations, has tried to, and in discussion with Ontario Hydro, that this is one of the things that the committee recognizes, that if the project goes ahead, the community as a whole, and I'm not just saying Fitzroy Harbour, has to have some consideration for it. So the municipality will be negotiating with Ontario Hydro for the transit routes that would be required. And we would envisage the housing stock in the greater area, which would go as far as Carleton Place. Right now at Carleton Place there is some excess housing. We also look at the possibility, and I happen to be just come through the process of sitting on a committee at Regional Council, subcommittee of transportation on commuter rail prospects for the Ottawa-Carleton region. We have related this to the project and recognize that this may be the opportunity to put in a commuter rail system in Ottawa Carleton on a trial basis if this project would go ahead. So the commuter rail line would be running from downtown Ottawa to Bristol on the Quebec side, and the line would be, the cars would be available for transfer of workers for the plant. But we are only looking at this in the vague possibility. There's nothing definite. Now, if there's something related more to your, I think it's a concern. I recognize your concern of how can the area cope with such an influx of employed people, and we really don't know the answer to it yet, but the committee will be working with the hydro if the project goes ahead.
Okay, my question was going to be simply, how can a town of 300 cope on weekends and at night with 700 unattached men? And I don't imagine they're only going to want to ride the commuter train. My next question is, you stated that there were going to be 550 permanent jobs created by the plant. You intimated that most of these jobs would be given to people who would be living in the area. Are you aware that the average salary of people at Pickering is $30,000?
No, I wasn't aware of that number. Is that based on the full staff of 620 people?
That's based on 620 people, and the entire budget for the plant is $19 million.
I can't substantiate the number, but it sounds high.
Okay, that is from Ontario Hydro.
Well,
$19 million a year in salaries.
Well,
so
that includes all costs, probably, does it?
I'm sorry?
That includes all costs, does it?
No, that is strictly labor costs.
It's not pensions and vacations and
I imagine so.
Medical.
I imagine it is.
And the dental plan that they now have, and so on.
Yes. Okay.
That's included in that.
I'm just wondering, to what extent will the impact be assessed of people with average salaries of $30,000 coming into this area?
That's a real concern in an area like this, and that's one of the jobs that Mayor Monroe said that it's one of the major concerns that the committee has, and I'm sure they will be dealing with us very extensively on it.
Now, in the report tabled by AECL before the Porter Commission, they talk about a reactor life or a plant life of 40 years. What happens to Fitzroy Harbour when you remove or you encase, entomb, or you mothball the plant? Do I gather that the local population then shrinks by 550 jobs?
If nothing further was done at the site, that's an obvious conclusion, I believe. If the plant was ultimately shut down, and I'm not aware of the ACL number of 40 years. My own view is that Pickering will run for 50, better. But you're getting way off into the speculative part of the future. I can't say today whether we wouldn't in 40 years just take out the reactor and put a new one in and keep running for another 100, or whether we would use some fancy new laser beam that came along and cut the thing up into little pieces and dispose of it. It's a little too far in the future for us.
I will resist asking a rhetorical question about wastes at this time. My last question is directed specifically at hydro, and that is, seeing that the impact of a nuclear power plant is, shall we say, at least in a 30-mile radius in the event of the worst possible incident, will Ontario Hydro be taking its traveling roadshow to Ottawa and set up a public participation process such as this marvelous one which we have out here, which unfortunately is a bit too far for some people in Ottawa? Will you be setting up a similar thing in Ottawa?
For construction of a nuclear plant here?
No, for Ottawa residents.
Regarding this plant here?
Regarding this plant.
Well, my first inclination would be no.
Want me to reply?
But maybe the mayor has some views on it. I feel that our interest is limited to the area we're in, but perhaps the mayor wants to say something on that.
I have certain responsibilities to regional council, as you know, and when this idea came about, it came to the planning committee of the region, I had the authority by resolution of the Planning Committee to use the staff that is with us here this evening. We will be reporting back to the Planning Committee. That committee, who is made up of elected representatives of the City of Ottawa, and if I know them, they will take an interest in this project and will look for the answers that will concern the people of Ottawa. And as a member of council, of the regional council, I can assure you that the concerns of the City of Ottawa will be taken into consideration in this study. Why not? Well, there is one chap right at the mic. I'm going to take a short one from him, and then I'll. It'll be short.
Okay, 2 short questions. First, sir, what is the cost of this nuclear power plant, approximately?
It'll be finished.
Oh, my name is Larry Hughes. I'm a teaching assistant at Carleton University. I'm also a systems analyst for Bell Canada.
What will the cost of the plant be?
Yes.
The in-service date for all 4 units would be 1989. I believe the cost as full dollars spent by 1989 will be $4.5 billion.
Billion?
$4.5 billion.
So that means we can have 4 Montreal games here or 4 Mirabelles. Okay. Thank you.
Well, that's right. You could.
Okay. Also, I am one of the strongest advocates of Candu as a nuclear system in Canada or in the world. It is the best in the world. I'll be the first person to admit that here. However, I wonder why Ontario Hydro has such a vested interest in nuclear power, because there are other alternatives. I'm not talking about far-fetched ideas like beaming solar energy from outer space or putting solar panels on everyone's roof, which does work, but we won't go into that. I'm talking about something quite simple as wood. Now, before you say no to it, I will admit that Hydro has done studies on wood as a source of energy, and they have come to the conclusion that wood is not the answer. The reason for this is because Hydro simply wants to burn the wood in a standard turbine, a steam turbine, that is about 35% efficient. However, if Hydro is willing to look at my study, which they are not, I've submitted to the Porter Commission, and the Porter Commission has not replied to me as yet, and it's been 3 weeks now. If they look at this study, they will see that the way I have described the possibility of using wood as a source of energy, Ontario would only have to use 3% forever. That's not 3% every year, it's 3% of Ontario forever as their supply of energy. This would replace all of Ontario Hydro's nuclear power until the year 2000. Now, I'm asking you, sir, since I cannot go to Toronto because I'm only a student, I'm wondering if you would take this to the Porter Commission for me and table it for me.
I'd be glad to take it to the Porter Commission, but I'm surprised that they have not accepted your submission, because the Porter Commission is the most open, publicly participative group that I've ever seen.
You mentioned that it's open, sir, because the Porter Commission, according to the Globe and Mail on Tuesday of this week, is in camera session because of, quote, security problems about nuclear power plants. Now, that's the point I raised about an hour ago, and I was booed for saying it. But security of a nuclear power plant is a very serious problem, as we've seen with Greenpeace 2 weeks ago landing at the Douglas Point, I believe. Now, the reason why Ontario Hydro is having these sessions in camera is because they are frightened that people will see the blueprints for a nuclear power plant such as Pickering. The Pickering power plant can be found in any library, and I've done it myself, and I've got photocopies of it here for you. So anyone here who is a terrorist or wishes to be a terrorist could quite easily go to a library, photocopy it, and go in and place the proper charges. You don't have to be a genius to do this type of thing.
Well, I'll try and respond to you. I respect your concerns, and I understand the reasons for them, but I suggest to you 2 things. First of all, I want to point out the Porter Commission is not an Ontario Hydro affair.
No, I realize that.
And we don't direct the way events at the Porter Commission goes. Dr. Porter does, under the advice of the Government of Ontario. But there have been charges made about being able to enter into reactors and blow them to smithereens, and I can assure you that that is not possible. You could put a plastic dynamite charge for each. Dr. Schulman's case, that was a spectacular event. Dr. Schulman entered apparently.
Then why is it in camera? It shouldn't matter.
I
If you're
haven't
so
any
secure-
idea. I've been on vacation for 2 weeks, and I read it in the Globe and Mail like you did yesterday. And I have no idea, and I don't know that anybody from Ontario Hydro would have any idea why Dr. Porter decided to do that. All I know is that the claim that you made, that you could simply walk in with a
I didn't make that
knapsack full of
claim, sir.
plastic
I did not
dynamite
make that
and
claim.
blow up that station is not possible.
Okay. Finally, are your stations insured?
Are stations insured? Of course they're
Should
insured.
something go wrong with this plant here, as it may, you cannot say it will not, because if you say it will not, you are contradicting Murphy's Law, and everybody knows that Murphy's Law does work.
Well, we design our plants
So they will not
for
fail
Murphy's
service
Law
thing.
to happen. I mean, what
So
is
it
it
will
not
happen.
Murphy's Law to design a plant for a 747 to fall down right on top of it? Is it not Murphy's Law to design a plant that the worst earthquake you could possibly conceive would occur right in this area and the plant would ride through it? Is it not Murphy's Law to design the plant off the bat for the worst combination of events that you can, even the most twisted mind could conceive of? That is designing for Murphy's Law.
But there's always that 1% chance. There's the 1% lunatic fringe, sir, that you don't take into
I
account.
quite
You
agree.
can't.
Nothing is perfect in this world, and it's simply a matter of
Then
trade-off
why
and
take a
assessment of
chance?
risk.
And will you please read this report that I'll give you?
I'd be happy to read it.
It's got my home address on it, so if you'd like to write back to me in response, I'd be very grateful.
Fine.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going, Mr. Carson deposited a couple of questions with John here, and John has consented to answer on those questions. We give John the rest.
Mr. Carson asked what the temperature will be at the outfall of the generating station. Is that correct, Mr. Carson? That's correct. We are presently studying several ways of cooling, and a certain amount of heat has to be discharged from the station. This can be done by bringing a small amount of cooling water through the condensers and discharging at a high temperature, or else taking a large quantity of water and discharging at a lower temperature. We at the moment have not decided, or in conjunction with the regulatory agencies, what that temperature will be. Now, one possibility would be to discharge the temperature at about 18 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 10 degrees Celsius, and out from the condensers. This would be mixed with the balance of the flow coming down the Ottawa River. And depending on the time of the year, this water could vary anywhere from 10,000 to 80,000 cubic feet a second. And the corresponding temperature will therefore change. Now, at the worst case, we calculate that the discharge at the outfall of the hydraulic station would be about 8 degrees Fahrenheit above the ambient temperature, which can run as high, I believe, as 78 degrees. So the discharge would be about 86 degrees down to the tail rays of shower falls. Now the temperature will also decay, and according to a medical model, the temperature about 16 or 18 miles downstreams will be less than 1 degree, so that's decaying very gradually. Now, what effect will it have on the formation of ice downstream of shower falls? Now, again, depending on the climatic conditions during the winter, it may delay the formation of ice near the outfall for anywhere to 14 days or probably longer. So if it's a very severe winter, it may be shorter, and if it's in not so severe, well, then it will be longer. Is this an answer to your question, Mr. Carson?
Thank you very much. Next at the mic. Now it's, the hour is getting on. We'll take there are three people at the near the mic. I don't want to shut you off, but we want to maintain the interest of the meeting as well. So would you briefly, please?
Yes, I would. My name is Bob Dawsey, and I'm a resident of Fitzroy Harbour. Have been for 10 years, and I'm proud to admit that I like it very much. There are a number, I'm sure, of people in the room who like it as well as I do. I must admit, gentlemen, that you have answered most of my questions since I started at the back. But to bring it back to a less technical nature, at least in my view, I also am the father of 3 children, and I am a very concerned man. I am concerned about my 3 children and the other 3 children who live up the block and all of those kinds of little ones who walk and run around. My own feeling at this point in time is questionable, I suppose. I believe it will be reasonable for the area. I am aware of the problems brought up by our learned colleagues from outside the area. They are things that we residents have thought about too. I don't intend to make a speech, and I apologize for having said as much as I have, but as I said, after waiting that long, I wanted to let you people know that there are indeed people from Fitzroy who are damned interested in whether it does or doesn't, and what effect it's going to have on our children, on our living kinds of conditions and all of that. It's not a question. I apologize. I lost them all the way up the line, but I just couldn't resist after waiting that long. I thank you.
If I just might respond to you, Bob, I think this is the reason the committee is set up, and we hope that we can fulfill the needs of the community and satisfy your concerns by the approach that we are taking. Go ahead, please.
My name is Helen Hackett, and I live on the 10th line of this township, and I would like to again state what this gentleman ahead of me has just stated. I'm very concerned because I like the lifestyle that we have, and I hope we can keep it. I'd like to know what's in it for the resident of West Carleton. Why do we have to entertain this concept at all?
Well, Mrs. Happick, is it? Happick, yes. That's always a difficult question that you face when you're. I'm responsible for all the new generating plans and developments that Ontario Hydro undertakes, and you face the same question everywhere you go. Is it a question of whether you provide electricity for the good of all, then somebody in the local area has got to suffer, and doesn't that, if it is suffering? Because it is the same with transmission lines. Farmers do not like transmission lines crossing their farms. People don't like generating stations that come in and change their lifestyle. And if it's possible to mitigate those effects and still meet what we believe our objective in this world is, which is to supply electricity, then we do the best job we can. But no undertaking that I know of in this world can come in, affect its intent, and end up not having some effect that some people will like and other people won't. And it's a matter of just how the people come down in this area, one side or the other, on this undertaking. And I must add, incidentally, that I agree with your point about the lifestyle. I think this is a beautiful area of the province.
Sir, my name is Diane Hope. I'm from Goleta. You talk about conservation of electricity, and apparently nobody much has taken any notice. The whole country hasn't taken any notice of it. Hardly. Say they did. Would these nuclear reactors be necessary then?
Yes, I sincerely believe that to be the case. Ms. Cope, I really hope that the conservation message takes effect, because we're not building enough nuclear stations if it doesn't. What I'm talking about now is a program where we have already made the best guess and taken the maximum bite out of the future energy demands of this country that conservation can affect. We're going to make assumptions that people will only use their dryers at certain times of the day in the future, that people will not buy as many hi-fi sets and things in the future as they have done over the past many, many years. That's already built in. And when you add it up, on the bottom line, we still need to build additional power stations. Because, for example, there are going to be 2 million more people live in the province of Ontario in 1995 than live here now. I mean, unless they close the immigration doors completely, unless they stop births completely in this province, unless some dramatic revolution takes place such that Ontario does not continue to be it is the industrial heartland of Canada, as you know. Unless those things happen, then the need for electricity is going to increase. And one gentleman has already pointed out, in fact, that we have not taken into account all the possible things that might cause it to grow even more. But we're trying to steer a line as best we can, and we see the need very clearly.
Well, do you not think then that the education which has been being put out by Hydro is good? You know, why aren't people taking any notice?
Well, yeah, that's a very good question, and we're wondering why. And I'd like to tell you one small example, if I could, and I think the people here might find it interesting. Imperial Oil also has been, believe it or not, advertising conservation, and when they compared why their conservation program wasn't working as effectively as we think ours is, we discovered something quite surprising. People will not conserve ostentatiously. Now, what I mean by that is, if some guy in Mississauga and Toronto has to buy a smaller car and is parked in his driveway, and he bought that smaller car because he wants to use less gas, you know, everybody's going to look and say, gee, look at that guy. I wonder if he's hard up or something because he's got a smaller car now, you know, and, well, you know, just a little worried about it. But if in the middle of the night you can turn your lights off and not use your dryer more often, if you can conserve and people don't know it, people will do it. Now, don't ask me why that's the case, but that seems to be human nature. That many people, at least in the cities, won't conserve as part of a great new movement, you know, to conserve our energy of the future. They will do a little bit if they're not seen to be doing it. Now, that's a strange fact of human nature, and I can't explain it.
And again, the solar energy, it isn't so far out, is it? You know, they are experimenting with it, I know. Could we not, instead of putting billions into nuclear, when one hears nuclear or atomic, instantly there's a sense of horror. You know, people know what can happen. And there is always a chance that something can happen.
Well, they guess at what will happen, Mrs. Cole. And you're right, solar is not impossible. And I want to emphasize again, we need every form of energy we can get for our Western society to survive. These people who polarize the issue, you know, you'll meet the people like the soft energy advocates like Amory Lovins, and they say it's got to be all solar and wind and extraction of methane from manure and whatever. Well, that's an extreme position. And on the other side, you get people who were categorized as mad technocrats, and they say all they want to do is build big nuclear power stations and nothing else. Well, neither of those positions are right. The right answer is we got to develop and build every possible source of energy that can come along. I think we should be in the tar sands. We should be bringing gas from the Arctic. I think we should be developing solar power. In fact, the most promising solar power development is in the solar power water heater. And I think it's quite reasonable that within 10 to 15 years, you'll have to pay more for it initially, but instead of the water heater you got now stuck down there in the basement, you'll have a water heater with a solar panel on it. Now that will conserve energy, but that's the first practical way that we see that energy can have a real impact, or that solar can have a real impact on our energy situation. And it'll come, but we need everything. We need wood, which has been mentioned today, we need nuclear, we need coal, we need everything in our society if we're going to continue to make do in this cold climate.
I lived through the war, last war. I have seen what people can do about conservation. I've seen how they have saved all kinds of things, food, newspaper, all kinds of things. And it was because the people wanted to. Now, your job, the Hydro, is to want and to make people want to conserve. And it can be done. But you have got to do the propaganda. And it can be done.
We're sure trying, Ms. Cope, but you can't put the nation on a wartime footing because they won't believe you. It's as simple as that. If I came to you and just said, ma'am, that's it, you can only have so much electricity, you're rationed, and you'd look around and say, everybody else isn't, why should I? It's an extremely difficult problem.
Well, I do ration, but I'm sure everybody in this room who are concerned They can do it. They can help hydro, and they can help the country, but they've got to want to.
I'm Ron Catterall. I'm from the Constance Bay area. I have 3 short questions. The first one is there a DC-3 flying the Ottawa River lately doing the sensor studies for the hydro project? There is a DC-3.
Yeah. Last week they were flying a gradiometer above the area, but I can't tell you whether it was a DC-3 or another.
Oh, well, that's okay. What is the relative flow for the cooling water and the main tributary for the Ottawa? What's the relative cubic rates?
Now, the cooling water flow for a 4 times 600 megawatt station is 4,700, say 4,800 cubic feet a second. The flow of the Ottawa River has a minimum flow of 14,000 cubic feet a second and a maximum flow of, I believe, as high as 130,000 cubic feet a second.
Somewhere around 10%.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
5 to 10%, depending on the season.
Season, yes.
And could you give me a summary why the Lambton site was rejected?
Oh.
Yeah, I'll do that, John. We own a piece of property. We have 4 units at Lambton now on Lake St. Clair. I think your question is aimed at, is there an environmental concern there? And that is not the primary reason. The amount of property that we own at Lambton is insufficient to construct a 4-unit station without acquiring more property. And I think I explained at the start that we can't buy property in this province anymore without going through a very long public participation and site selection process. And which is fair enough. But the Lambton station is large enough to build oil-fired generation. And that was the original plan, that if we put 2 more turbine units at Lambton, it would burn oil taken from the Petrosar refinery just 2 miles or 7 miles downriver from it. But as I said before, we've got categorically decided that we will not burn gas or oil in the future to produce electricity, and for that reason Lambton was not considered a feasible alternative.
Okay, was there local rejection by the neighborhood
No, it never
population?
got that far.
Okay, thanks very much.
They didn't have to be consulted. We threw it out.
Ladies and gentlemen, the hour is getting on. Alison has a couple of comments to make in relation to the questions, and I'm going...
Okay. I'm from the area. My name is Brian Darcy. We only have supplies of uranium at the outside from 20 to 30 years. Now, I think that's disputable and it's arguable. But the point is, what I fear is that if it doesn't take much modification, as far as I can understand, to modify the Candu reactor to use plutonium, and you talked earlier about the cycle, if I might say just a little bit glibly, because plutonium is a different element to uranium, and I'm no physicist, okay? So the question is, what's Ontario Hydro's assessment of the uranium supplies? Because that really leads into the question, if not uranium, then plutonium. And if plutonium, I think there are a lot of questions, environmentally and otherwise, that will affect my children and a lot of other children here, and not only in this immediate area, but in the larger area. The second question is a fast one, and that is, how much does it cost to decondition the reactors? And on what basis are you answering this question? What empirical data have you got that really would establish a solid factual answer?
Okay. Dealing with your first question, the Candu reactor does use natural uranium, mined mostly in Ontario. As you know, the uranium business has been boom and bust for 20 years. There was a tremendous exploration went on in the 50s when the military programs were building up in the United States. And the price, there was a lot of uranium discovered. And it went into a serious decline, and virtually no exploration took place for 15 years. In the last 2 or 3 years, the price of uranium has gone from $6 a pound spot to $55. And when you get $55 a pound spot price for a commodity of any sort, people start coming out of the woodwork with exploration money, and that is just what's happened. The exploration boom is on in Canada, and they have in the last 18 months discovered more uranium, or as much, I think, approximately, than we thought we ever had before. Now, to answer your specific question, there's two parts to this and a serious dilemma. Last year, Canada produced 5,000 tons of uranium from the ground. Last year, Canada used 500 tons. Now, there's a factor of 10, and the rest of that's going out and export. Now, this is a real problem. We've got a tremendous production capability. It's just like the gas and oil question, exactly. We've got tremendous production capability in this country, and it's going out and it's having a tremendous benefit for jobs and balance of payments. But what's going to happen down the road if we export it all now and it isn't available in the future? So we've got this one dilemma, which is we got it all, but most of it's going out of the country. And the second half is, what new uranium is there around? And I can tell you that my own view is, and I've been in the business 15 years, that there's a hell of a lot of uranium in this country. I think the inferred reserves are of the order of 600,000 tons. The proven reserves are around 90,000, and I'm banking on that. But quite aside from that, the most important thing of all is that the federal government policy has been at least rational enough, in my view, that there's a set-aside process that all the uranium required for all of the nuclear plants committed in Canada must be allocated before any exports can take place. So I guess I can't put an exact date on it, but I'm firmly convinced there's sufficient uranium to take us through to the next century without going into the plutonium cycle. I'm firmly convinced of that.
The next century is 23 years.
23 years away.
Yeah.
That's just a moment, I'll finish that point. That is, and have enough to cover the rest of those reactors as they keep running through to the end of their life. And some of the reactors that we built today will run for 40 years or 50 years, and that uranium is allocated. Now, the real problem is, though, in 1995, the people of Canada, as I said earlier, are going to have an interesting choice, because there will have been enough plutonium produced in the reactors that have operated up to that time that will have the equivalent of energy value to all of the oil that ever existed in Alberta, or of the oil reserves that exist in Alberta today. If you wanted to extract that plutonium and recycle it through the Candu reactor. You're quite right. If that choice wants to be made, at that time, the Candu reactor could burn plutonium.
That frightens the hell out of me.
Pardon me?
That frightens the hell out of me. Do you want to answer? You've answered the first one. Could you answer the second one quickly?
Which was, decommissioning. The cost of decommissioning a nuclear plant, well, first of all, the number that I quote is a little more firmly based maybe than some of the oppositions would believe. I want to emphasize there is a unique feature of the Candu reactor, which is its modular construction. Unlike the American reactors, I both said Yankee, the American reactors, which are a pressure vessel and very structure that's very difficult to take apart and get rid of. The Candu reactor consists of these pressure tubes, and they can be taken out and replaced. We've been doing that consistently. The calandrias have been changed in the Chalk River reactors upriver here twice already. Not so. Not so. The major change was 3 years ago, and we did it to prove it. But we did it in 1975 to prove that it could be done. And the third and best basis of all, I believe, is the Elk River reactor in the United States, where the whole darn nuclear power plant was taken right down to grade by the United States Atomic Energy Commission. Every last chunk of concrete, steel, and pipe was disposed of, and the ground was returned to a level park site. And they know the cost of that, and we know the cost of that, and that's what our cost estimates are based on.
Would you give me a cost, please? I asked for an actual cost.
The cost is about 2% of the cost of the station.
Yeah, I'd like to say that there are people who believe that it's from 10 to 100%. And not being an expert, I guess on two issues we disagree. But I think it's important just to say one last thing, and that was that one of the isotopes, I believe, of plutonium was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they're still paying for it.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki were both uranium bombs.
Yeah, I'm sorry, 235, that's right, you're right. And plutonium's more devastating. Thank you very much.
Mary, do you want to?
I have one quick question about the process. It's a non-technical question, so you can rest. My name is Mary Gregory. And I'm a past member of the executive of the Federation of Citizens Association. So one of my interests here is how are we going to be, how is Ontario Hydro going to be involving the people of the region of Ottawa-Carleton in this important decision as to whether or not we have a nuclear power station at this particular site in the region. Considering the fact that the population of the region is 530,000, you're asking people here in the community of 300 what their feelings are, and I want to know you're going to go into the same kind of lengths to determine the feelings of people in the region, as it's going to be directly affecting them also.
We're hoping that this meeting is going to give us some direction for our next step in our public participation. And as I stated before, we'll be going back through the planning committee, and we will be having some reaction there as to the direction we will go in the city. Now, there's one or two of the aldermen from the city of Ottawa here tonight, and I know perfectly well that they're going to be taking the story back, and I think it will develop, but right now I can't tell you how.
Could I perhaps make one suggestion? And that is, I'd like to see this issue being brought out very quickly and informing people well as to what exactly is happening. And I think one of the ways of doing that is perhaps by going to the people and asking them through their elected representatives to perhaps send a representative from each township or municipality to form an advisory committee in order to determine how you would go about best informing and inviting participation from the public at large. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Edith Barrett, and I come from Woodridge, which is just down the river. And I would like to ask, what kind of cooling do you propose to use for the water being...
Sorry, Mrs. Barrett, I can't hear you very well.
It's Edith Barrett from Woodridge, down the river. And I would like to ask what kind of cooling system you propose to use for the water that will be coming out of the power plant.
Well, it's what's called the once-through cooling system, Mrs. Barrett. The turbine has a condenser, which is just a series of tubes underneath it, and the water simply comes in from the river, passes through these tubes, does not come in contact with any other fluids or processes in the plant, and is pumped back into the river.
That's not good enough.
That's once-through cooling, and the temperature goes up about 10 degrees.
Exactly, but that's much too much. If the temperature of the river goes up more than 1 or 2 degrees, we have trouble.
Well, we will set whatever temperature limits there are to meet any biological concerns on this river, Mrs. Barrett. We have to. I mean, it would just be irresponsible to build a thermal power station which would cause environmental damage. And that's a pledge from Ontario Hydro that stands.
My understanding is that the only viable cooling system is the one where the water is shot up into the air and cooled and comes down within 1 or 2 degrees, not more than 2 degrees of what it was when it came out of the river.
Are you referring to a spray cooling pond or a? Well, no. They're not a viable system for a power station, the spray cooling pond at the moment. The alternative would be what we call cooling towers, which none of which we have in the province at the moment. And they would have their difficulties associated with them, which are fairly extensive from both the environmental and the cost point of view. We believe the once-through cooling system, which we have on 15 stations now built in the province, has been demonstrated to be satisfactory, both on the Great Lakes and on river systems.
And this has nothing to do with the water quality in the rivers and lakes where it's being discharged?
Well,
the rivers and lakes are in pretty bad
the temperature of the river went up just where I'm staying up at Deep River this week. The temperature of the river's gone up 4 degrees in the week I've been there. And we would stay under any temperature increase that nature would impose on that river if at all possible. And it would be possible. Well, I simply said we will not build a station that causes environmental damage to the Ottawa River. It would just be irresponsible to do so. And we have enough environmental capabilities, both outside the company and inside, to prove, not just to ourselves, but to everyone, that would be the case. And quite on top of that, if it turned out that even the best thinking in the world said it wasn't the case, then we would take the steps necessary to put it right.
Another question. What is Ontario Hydro doing to encourage government buildings and other large buildings to use a heat recovery system, such as is being used in the new Metropolitan Life building?
I guess the best answer to that is our own example. I don't know if you've ever seen our own corporate office in Toronto, Ms. Barrett, the Hydro building on the corner of University and College, but that is probably the most energy efficient building in the country. And there isn't a week goes by that there isn't a visiting party of people coming in to see how this works.
Yes, but what are you doing about encouraging, like the government buildings in Ottawa, which are lighted from
I would
morning to
hope the
night?
federal government, who's supposed to have an even more strong desire for energy conservation than Ontario Hydro has, would look after their own house. But I can only say that our conservation program is aimed at everyone, governments and citizens.
Thank you.
One quick question.
A quick question. Michael Bine, Ontario People's Energy Network. I'm from Ottawa, and I don't mean to come up here and steal the show from the people that live here, but I feel that as living in Ottawa, I have a direct personal concern in this matter as well. I just have a question about. Well, could you tell me first of all roughly how many people are employed by Ontario Hydro
Today?
today?
About 24,100 people. That's down from 25,800 last year.
And could you tell me how many of those are engaged in work involving energy conservation?
I can't answer it directly. I get the Energy Conservation Division.
The question came up at the Porter hearings, and the answer was somewhat under 100.
Yeah, I imagine that's true. As you know, it's a very big business to generate, deliver, supply, and maintain an electrical power system.
And are you aware of figures from the Science Council of Canada that they've done very, I would say, reasonable studies of the potential for energy conservation in this country, and it did not have anything to do with personal discomfort. Most of the measures advocated involved improving efficiency of machinery, insulating houses. I think they assumed that 10% of the people were going to actually turn down their thermostats. And this, if the population was encouraged to do this, they concluded that more energy could be saved between now and the year 2000 than the whole nuclear program could provide. Do you have any comment on that?
I have no comment. I'm sorry. I think it's like any set of numbers you want to produce that you can make them say what you want them to say.
That's what a lot of us feel about some of your answers on decommissioning. Could you please, from the Science Council of Canada.
Who are they?
They're a very eminent body of well-respected scientists in this country. I believe it was Senator Mike Gravel of Alaska who wrote a foreword to a book titled Poison Power, in which he stated that the average nuclear reactor contained an inventory of radioactive materials roughly equivalent to the fallout from 1,000 Hiroshima bombs. Would you say that's an accurate assessment of the amount of radioactivity you want to house by the river down here?
I would guess, I don't know how much reactivity comes from a Hiroshima bomb, but there's a lot of radioactivity in a nuclear power station. Very well contained, I might add.
In that case, could I ask you one question about the containment system? Could you explain to the people what a containment system is and what its design reliability is supposed to be? You say everything is designed for containment.
Yeah.
Could you explain what that is?
You want me to go into a technical explanation?
Well, just explain what the containment system is, and the figure I've heard is that the Atomic Energy Control Board expects it to function 99.9% of the time. Is that correct?
99.99. Yes, that's correct. But the containment system is not just the one building. The fission products are contained in pellets, and 90% of the fission products are trapped in the matrix of the uranium oxide pellet. The pellets are contained in fuel bundles, which are carefully examined, non-corrosive metal cans. The cans are contained in pressure tubes inside a reactor, which is inside an internal concrete vault, which in turn is contained inside a reactor building which consists of concrete about 8 feet thick, which is in turn connected to a vacuum building, which if any leak of any steam or pressure of any sort out of the high pressure coolant system occurs, will take the whole system subatmospheric, so that even if there was a leak in the containment itself, the leakage would be inward rather than outward into the atmosphere. And finally, the whole area is surrounded by a 1 kilometer exclusion radius, so we have 5 barriers of protection, not 1. And you multiply the product of each of those barriers to get the level of reliability that we're talking about, which is not 99.99%. It is 99.79.
Okay, now I personally walked through the 5th barrier at Pickering about a couple of weeks ago and got my name in all the newspapers.
I read about that in the Globe.
Yeah, no, I'd like, I don't believe we have the time. I don't believe we have the time.
I'm going to interject here because
to go through the other 4, but I could do it in a single failure event. I could show these people how a single failure event could penetrate all those other barriers. And as a reference, I would use a $500,000 study that Ontario Hydro did recently, and it has not yet been released to the public. Thank you.
the people that are left here, we would like to get an opinion from them for the benefit of those of us who are working on this. We have the options of proceeding with other public meetings, which I expect we will take. We have the options of bringing in, the guests here this evening have indicated that they will bring in people for a complete session on a nuclear plant as such, and there are these variations of which the committee would be carried out. Now, we would like to have some response from you people who have weathered the storm to stay with us, to direct the committee on what you would like to see us proceed with next in this area, and of course we will expand outside of this area as well to the other parts of the community. So I would just like a couple of comments from anyone in the audience who would like to give their suggestions to us. Could I have a little order, please? Is there anyone in the audience would have some suggestions for the committee in respect to our procedures from here on, the type of meetings you want? Do you want meetings like we have tonight? Do you want small study groups, or what is your wish? Or do you want specialty meetings dealing with one particular subject? Have I any one? Yes. A debate, and you would like, okay, the committee, you would like the committee to arrange a debate with people who from outside of Ontario Hydro on the issue of a nuclear station. Is that okay?
Could I make a comment, please, Mr. Chairman? Is the lady aware that there is the debate going on in Toronto, and has been for 5 weeks, on the subject of nuclear power, in which anyone and everyone comes and makes their case to both those who are for and those who are against? It's called the Nuclear Power Debate, which is part of the Royal Commission on Electric Power Planning. Now, probably the problem is they're too far away. I don't know that they came into the Ottawa area as part of their sessions. Well, I'm not dodging anything. I'm asking her a question myself, which is simply, were you aware? Yeah, it's tough when you're here and that's going on in Toronto, and that's one of Dr. Porter's problems, as I understand it. But there is a very, very serious and very intensive debate going on the question of nuclear power futures for this province. And that's one possible answer. Another might be to ask Dr. Porter to come up here.
Okay, the committee will look. The committee will look at this possibility. Now, we're not going to make a guarantee of how successful we will be, but we will certainly endeavor to try to meet this request. Now, is there anything else that you would like the committee to? Have you a suggestion relating to the subject at hand? Okay, proceed.
Yeah, I do have a question, but I'll ask it some other time. One thing I noticed as I was sitting back was that there's a lot of conflict between the locals and all these experts from Pollution Probe and whatever they all were, but they seem to have developed a fair amount of expertise, and I think your debate should somehow include different factions so that we don't have this monopolization of the floor by these people who are outside experts. So you would set up the debate with a member from Pollution Probe, a member from Nuclear Coalition Responsibility, whatever they were. So you get all sides sitting with the same respectability at the front, and instead of these debates that go back and forth